everyone knows the giant stone heads of Easter Island. The flat faces, the heavy brows, the long ears, standing in a row with their backs to the sea. And almost everyone knows them slightly wrong, in two ways at once. First, they are not just heads. Dig down a few meters at the quarry where they were made, and the famous heads turn out to be sitting on top of full bodies, long torsos with folded arms and carved hands, buried to the neck by centuries of sediment. And second, the story we tell about the people who carved them, the one in the textbooks and the TED Talks, the story of a civilization that cut down its last tree, multiplied past all reason, and committed what one famous book called ecological suicide is, according to a run of studies published in 2024, very probably not true. So today, the most misread island on Earth. Who really carved the Moai of Rapa Nui, how they moved, and what actually happened to the people we have spent decades blaming for their own destruction. Start with where it is, because the isolation is the whole context. Rapa Nui sits in the South Pacific, roughly 3,500 kilometers west of Chile, and more than 2,000 kilometers from the nearest inhabited speck of land. It is one of the most remote places human beings have ever chosen to live. Polynesian voyagers found it by canoe, navigating by stars, swells, and birds across an emptiness of ocean, and the best current radiocarbon work, led by the archaeologists Terry Hunt and Carl Lipo at the beach of Anakna, places that arrival around the year 1200, several centuries later than older estimates once claimed, though the exact date is still argued. The island got its European name almost by accident, when the Dutch navigator Jacob Roggeveen sighted it on Easter Sunday of 1722. Its own people call it Rapa Nui, and call themselves the Rapanui. Then the statues. Archaeologists have catalogued about 887 moai, and the numbers alone tell a story. Nearly 400 of them never left Rano Raraku, the volcanic crater quarry where they were cut from soft volcanic stone, many still half-finished, lying in the rock at every stage of completion. Around 288 made it to their destinations and were raised onto stone platforms called ahu, most of them standing with their backs to the sea, facing inland to watch over the villages of the living. And about 90 more were caught in between, lying along the ancient roads from the quarry to the coast, abandoned in transit, as if the work had simply stopped one day. Some wore separate topknots of red stone, called pukao, quarried at a different site and weighing up to 12 tons each. The largest of all, a giant the islanders call Te Tokanga, still lies in the quarry where it was being carved, about 21 meters long and an estimated 270 tons, a statue so big it was probably never going to stand at all. Which brings us back to those buried bodies. The idea that the moai are only heads is a trick of erosion. The statues standing alone on the slopes of Rano Raraku were never shipped anywhere. They stand in the quarry, and over the centuries mud and debris washed down the hillside and slowly buried them to the neck. Archaeologists actually knew this as far back as 1914, but the public only caught on around 2012, when photographs of excavated, full-bodied statues spread across the internet and crashed the website that posted them. The archaeologist Jo Ann van Tilburg and her Easter Island statue project carefully excavated 2 of these buried giants and found that the hidden torsos were not blank. They were covered in carvings, petroglyphs cut into the stone, protected for centuries by the very sediment that hid them, while the exposed heads above slowly weathered away. What we all photograph is the damaged part. The bodies, underground, are better preserved. The obvious question is how? How does a society with no metal, no wheels, and no draft animals move hundreds of statues weighing dozens of tons across miles of rough ground? For a long time, the assumption was that they laid the Moai on their backs on wooden sledges and rollers and dragged them, which would have meant felling huge numbers of trees, a key plank in the destruction story. But the islanders' own oral tradition always said something stranger, that the Moai walked. In 2012, Hunt and Lipo took that literally. With a 5-ton replica and just 18 people pulling 3 ropes, they rocked a standing statue from side to side so that it lurched forward, step by step, and walked it down a road at 100 meters in under an hour. They argue the statues were shaped to do exactly this, with a forward lean and a curved, D-shaped base, and that the ones abandoned on the roads lie in ways that fit walking rather than dragging. Not everyone is convinced. Van Tilburg calls the demonstration a stunt rather than an experiment and favors horizontal transport. It is a genuine, unresolved argument, and it matters because if the statues walked upright, the islanders never needed to strip the forest to move them. Now the big story, the one Rapa Nui is famous for outside of the statues. In its most popular form, made a global parable by the geographer Jard Diamond in his 2005 book Collapse, it goes like this. The Rapa Nui arrived in a paradise covered in giant palm forest. They multiplied, perhaps to 15,000 people or more. In a competitive frenzy of statue building, they cut down tree after tree to move the Moai, until they felled the very last palm. With the forest gone, the soil eroded, the canoes could no longer be built, and the society crashed into famine, warfare, and even cannibalism. They toppled each other's statues, and a civilization destroyed itself by wrecking its own environment. It is a powerful, terrible story, and it became a parable for our whole planet, the island as a small, doomed Earth. There is just one problem. The evidence has been quietly falling apart. Some of it is true. The forest really did disappear. Pollen cores show a palm forest that is simply gone today. But the cause was not only axes. When Polynesians arrived, they brought, deliberately or not, the Polynesian rat, which had no predators on the island and ate palm seeds. Gnawed palm nuts found across Rapa Nui suggest the rats devoured the forest's future faster than the palms could regrow, while people cleared land to farm. The loss was real, but it looks less like a frenzy of self-destruction and more like a slow ecological shift the islanders adapted to. And here is the part that breaks the parable. In 2024, a team led by Dylan Davis at the Columbia Climate School used satellite imaging and machine learning to map the island's rock gardens, the fields where Rapa Nui farmers deliberately broke up volcanic rock to fertilize and shelter their crops. They found far fewer of these gardens than the doomsday model needs. The land could realistically have fed only around 3,000 people, not 15,000. There was probably never a giant overpopulation to crash. The island seems to have held a small, stable population that had learned, cleverly, to farm a hard place. Then came the genes. Also in 2024, a separate team led by Victor Mornomayar sequenced the DNA of 15 Rapa Nui individuals who lived between roughly 1670 and 1950. If the population had crashed in the 1600s, as the ecocide story claims, their genomes would carry the scar of it, a sharp genetic bottleneck. The scar was not there. The DNA showed a population that grew steadily from settlement right up to European contact, with no sign of a pre-contact collapse at all. The same study turned up something else remarkable. Those genomes carry a small but clear amount of Native American ancestry, mixed in before any European set foot on the island. Somehow, across the widest stretch of open ocean on the planet, Rapa Nui and indigenous Americans had met and had children centuries before 1722. The people we were taught to remember as a cautionary tale of stupidity were, on the evidence, skilled enough to farm a desert of rock, possibly skilled enough to reach South America and return, and stable enough to leave no genetic trace of the collapse we invented for them. So if they did not destroy themselves, what happened? The real collapse is documented, and it is not ancient. It came from outside, and it came fast. In December 1862, Peruvian slave ships descended on Rapa Nui, and over the following months abducted around 1,500 people, roughly half the island, including much of its leadership and the elders who held its traditions. Most of the captives died of disease and abuse in Peru. When a handful of survivors were finally sent home, they carried smallpox, which tore through the island and killed perhaps 1,000 more. Tuberculosis followed. By 1877, the Rapanui, who had numbered several thousand for most of their history, had been reduced to 111 people. That is the real collapse of Easter Island. It was not ecological suicide centuries before Europeans arrived. It was kidnapping and epidemic, done to them within living memory. The civilization did not nearly end because its people were foolish. It nearly ended because other people came and took them. This is usually where the strangest theories arrive, the ones that insist a remote people could not possibly have made such things, that it must have been a lost civilization or visitors from the stars. The quarry is the answer to all of it. Rano Raraku is not a mystery. It is an interrupted workshop, hundreds of moai frozen at every stage of carving, with the stone tools beside them, the unfinished faces still attached to the bedrock, and the abandoned giant lying where it was cut. We can see exactly how the moai were made, by human hands with stone picks, because the makers left the evidence mid-sentence. The statues were carved by the Rapanui, full stop. As for why nearly every standing moai was eventually toppled, face down, by the 19th century, that too is debated, and may owe as much to the chaos after European contact as to any conflict before it. The ones standing proudly in the photographs today were raised back up by archaeologists in the 20th century. And there is one genuine mystery left that no revision has solved. The Rapanui are the only people in Oceania who appear to have invented writing. It is a script called rongorongo, rows of tiny, precise glyphs of birds, fish, and human figures carved into wooden tablets. Only about 24 objects bearing it survive, and not a single line of it has ever been read. For years, skeptics assumed the islanders simply copied the idea of writing after watching Spanish officials sign an annexation document in 1770. But in 2024, radiocarbon dating of the wood of one tablet returned a date in the late 1400s, before any European arrived, hinting that rongorongo may be one of the very few times in human history that a people invented writing entirely on their own. The dating is of the wood, not the carving, so the case is not closed. But it leaves us with a small, undeciphered library, written by the same hands that carved the giants, in a code we still cannot crack. So what is the real story of Easter Island? Not a horror story about people too stupid to stop cutting trees. The evidence we have now describes something harder and more human. A small group of extraordinary navigators who reached the loneliest island on Earth learned to farm bare volcanic rock, carved nearly 900 giants, and may well have walked them across the land, held a stable society for 5 centuries, and were then nearly erased by slavers and disease they never saw coming. The ecocide parable told us more about our own fears than about them. We wanted Rapa Nui to be a warning, a tidy little Earth that killed itself, and so we read that ending onto a people who did not actually live it. It is the same lesson the bodies of Pompeii keep teaching. The past does not arrive with captions, and the stories we tell about the dead are very often stories about ourselves. The Moai are still standing, backs to the sea, faces to the land. We are still deciding what they mean. And the people who made them are still here, on the island, correcting the record.